All right, all right. Today, we are talking about going beyond the role of fiduciary, right? So if you are considering a new relationship with a financial advisor, the starting point is that you want to consider whether or not they have a fiduciary role. So we're going to touch on what the definition of the fiduciary standard is, but then we're going to talk about that point at which your financial portfolio becomes more complex, right? So you have the next layer of service that you're requiring. What does that look for? How do you evaluate the relationship when you're moving beyond just that basic level of fiduciary standard? So who wants to start us off by just kind of sharing about what does that role of fiduciary mean?
I think, Jeremiah, you're the resident attorney, and I think that you're held to the highest standard as far as legal services, right? I mean, What is your thought on that?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about fiduciary duty is they're different, oddly enough. And even different people like a CPA, a certified public accountant, they don't have a fiduciary duty to a client. They are public accountants. They're to make sure that the public can trust financials. So their role, even though they have confidential information, is a little different. Then you have financial advisors. You have anyone from insurance sales, annuity sales, that are commission-based, all the way to fiduciary financial advisors, which we'll talk about most of that. And then in my mind, on the other side, you then have attorneys, to where if someone breaches a fiduciary duty, they can be, of course, sued if that was what's needed, or they could lose a certain license. Well, on the attorney side, if you lose your law license, you can't do anything. You can't be an attorney anymore. You're done. On the financial advisor side, there's still a lot of financial things that can be done that don't require a fiduciary role. And so that's where it becomes really, really confusing for folks, especially in this financial advising space, to say, I need an advisor. I need someone to come along beside me, but are they representing me? Are they representing someone else? Do they get a commission? How do they get paid? And so for us, when we say we're a fiduciary, it means two main things. It's a duty of care and a duty of loyalty. So there's all sorts of legal definitions that go with those, but the duty of care means you have to pay attention. You have to have the right skill set to be able to serve that client. There's some legal standards there. And the duty of loyalty, which is a big one, you have to do things that are in the client's best interest. And that's what we tell a lot of clients, but as a fiduciary role, we're in the client's best interest. We're not getting commissions. We're not selling things. And if there is a commission in some odd product, it has to be disclosed, it has to be discussed, it has to be understood. I think it's hard when we talk to clients and say, oh yeah, I work with this broker and they don't charge me anything. I'm pretty sure they don't charge me anything. And we dig into their statements to say, well, not only are they charging you often a management fee, they're also charging you commissions on the products that they've recommended over the years. And that's what makes this industry fairly tough for folks to come into as a client, as looking for support, is that people get paid in so many different ways and they're held to different standards. And you really have to kind of be a discerning consumer to find your way to an advisor that's really going to represent you well.
Yeah, I think the thing that I went through when I became a certified financial planner decades ago now, there was a large argument, a really substantive argument about fee-based and fee-only. And there was a lot of articles in Wall Street Journal and other financial services. So you only want to deal with a fee only. And I argued back and forth is that we do the research on investments, products, insurance, anything that has to do with protecting the client or providing services. And we did all the investigation on, let's say, an insurance policy. And at the end of the day, the best policy had a commission structure to it. And I never felt comfortable going outside of my office and finding an insurance agent to write the policy, and he gets the commission, they get the commission, and I charge the client for a fee to do the services. I just never felt comfortable with that. I said, if I've got the ability to investigate, that language now has kind of dissipated. It's gone away because there's enough pushback from the industry that as long as you're doing the fiduciary standard, and the fiduciary standard in my mind is disclosure. If we're doing this, I disclose to the client, this has a commission to it. Do you feel comfortable paying me, that the company's going to pay me the commission for the work that's done? If I give them all the analysis, I try to give them as much information as I can so that they can do that discernment. I've never had a client go, oh, no, I want that outside insurance agent or whatever to write the business and get compensated for it. Again, I get full disclosure, all the work that we've done. And I cut my teeth on this industry 50 years ago in the insurance industry. So I feel comfortable in that space. And so anyway, as the practice matures, all these variables have a tendency to settle out, right?
Yeah. But I like that as a baseline, right? You want to work with somebody who has your best interest is their interest, and that you feel like there's this adequate level of disclosure. If, for example, you're in a place where I'm like, I'm not sure what I'm being charged, right? If it feels too good to be true, it probably is. And if furthermore, you're not aware of what you're being charged, what you're paying for their service, then they probably didn't adequately disclose what the terms of the relationship are, right? So that's a baseline.
Yep.
And moving us a little bit to the next step for today's topic to talk about once your financial life becomes a little bit more complex. Let's say you step into business ownership. Let's say you own multiple different business entities. Let's say you receive an inheritance of multiple different types of assets that are coming over and you've never had that type of wealth or those sorts of assets to manage, right? So complexity can come in a lot of different ways. And that fiduciary standard still could mean that they're giving you generic advice. It could mean that they have a reactive form of financial planning where they're reviewing documents with you and giving you kind of a baseline. They're maybe offering some products periodically, right? So what we want to do is encourage the audience when you're thinking now about the relationship, the fiduciary standard is like the first base, right? It's just like level 1. And then the next level that you're looking for here is a team that can be proactive. You want them to think about tax and tax advantaged strategy over time. And you want to talk about integrated planning techniques. So as we work with more and more business owners, we're not just talking about their personal finances, we're talking about their business entities and how that can benefit their personal finances and goals, etc. So those are just 3 baselines, right? But what we're doing is talking about kind of the next layer of deepening the relationship with your financial advisor. What can you expect?
Yeah, and I think where we're at is like what you say, it's kind of table stakes or it's first base. Working with a fiduciary, I feel like in this day and age is just a requirement. If they're not a fiduciary, you should be having a whole other set of conversations about how they're paid, understand that. But if they're a fiduciary and they're in a fiduciary role, okay, that's first base. But as your life is complex, the type of clients that we serve, that's just the beginning, right? We need to talk about how are they being proactive and expansive? What are their actual expertise? Where do they step into? And I think it's still a good one to talk through in this fiduciary conversation to understand how people get paid and what potential even conflicts are there so you can address them. And hopefully your advisor is bringing this up. For example, in our industry, it's common that people get paid off of an AUM, assets under management. They get a management fee. So based on the fees that we're managing, we get a certain percentage, and that's the fee that we receive. Well, that can create a conflict to say, well, what if there's a real estate opportunity that moves that money outside of our management? Does that mean that we get a smaller fee? Well, it might, but we should be talking about that to say, our industry tends to have a natural bent, I feel, a little away from real estate because it's not the same fee structure.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a number of ways to deal with that, to either get compensated for it or just have that relationship so that that's not a big issue, but that should be discussed to say we're maybe skewing this. Another one often is when people put money into like a donor advised fund or some of these charitable giving items. So does that decrease the amount of assets that are being managed by the manager, therefore decreasing their fee? Maybe.
Right. And so the question is, are they still acting as a fiduciary, but they're not making that strategic recommendation? The answer can be yes, right? So, right, you want to identify an advisor that's bringing you strategic advice that's not in their best interest. And sometimes that means diversification to things like real estate, obviously charitable giving from a tax advantage perspective, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just think we have 2 examples. We had a client recently that a real estate opportunity came to them and they brought it up. And so we said, great, let's look into this. Let's see, how does this fit into your larger portfolio, your larger life plan? And we kind of analyzed what the lockup period was, how it was going to work. And it didn't make sense. And so we said, great, this doesn't make sense. Now that could have been a moment where we were simply tightening into, we want to keep this money, we don't want to be there. That's not how we work. But that analysis, has to be part of the conversation. On the flip side, Randy, you had a client a few years ago who was in the real estate space, and you'd made a comment to him like, hey, we're building up your investments, we're building up these things. You said, you're already out seeing these real estate. You need to buy every couple of years. We want you to buy another rental property. That's part of your portfolio. And now he's done that. So he has a nice portfolio of real estate as well as stocks and bonds. But that advice was saying, this is your long-term trajectory. This is how these other assets fit in there.
And actually, with the first example, I'm sorry, you go ahead, Dan.
No, I just said it's amazing to me how many real estate people that have been in the business a long time don't take the opportunity to accumulate real estate. They sell it, but they don't buy it. And I said, during times, you're going to find opportunities to acquire property that's at a bargain price. Why don't you do that? And it's for some of the brokers I've talked to, it's like the light goes off. It's like, oh, well, you're in the middle of that. Why not use some of that knowledge that you have and the work that you do? There's nothing wrong with you to enhance yourself. Again, you're serving your clients. There's a line there that can be crossed, and you have to be very careful about it.
I think on the flip side too, we have several clients that have a tremendous amount of real estate, commercial or residential, and they've maybe waited to come and make a relationship with a financial advisor. I'm thinking about one scenario specifically where it was really building out an estate plan that caused them to come in and speak with us. And the reality is there's still a lot of good work that a financial advisor can do in preparation for both the estate plan, but the transfer of assets to the next generation. At one point or another, you're going to need to liquidate some of those holdings for the cash flow needs. So that ties into retirement planning. So it's not that there's not good work that can't be done. And going back to what you were talking about, Dad, is how do you structure that relationship? Obviously, we don't work for free. We wouldn't want our clients to expect that either. But how do we structure the relationship if we don't have a tremendous amount of assets that we're managing currently, but we're giving good advice for structuring their financial portfolio? There's ways to structure that relationship in a way that makes sense for both parties. This is where, I loved this point as we were preparing for this podcast that, you really want an advisory relationship where they're not afraid to give you the advice that you need. And sometimes that honest advice is not going to be in line with what you want, frankly. But do you have an advisor that's willing to help you avoid a bad decision and is not just only talking to you about the total return of your investable assets, right? That's important. That's a piece of the puzzle. But are they also truly acting as a consultant and a true advisor who's willing to risk basically making you unhappy by saying, well, I kind of disagree with that choice. Or I think a lot of times when we approach, like in Jeremiah's earlier example, we had a chance to talk to them about liquidity risk. What does that mean? The answer wasn't no, don't invest in real estate. It was just not at this time. Where do we want to be in terms of cash flow and accumulated savings and capital before you start to consider real estate, and why, right?
Right. And I think that comment to say if the person who's doing your finances is just babysitting your money, right? They just talk about your return. They talk about how much you made or didn't make. And if you're 7 or 8 figures, $1 million plus, 10 million plus, that is not enough, right? For them just to babysit your money. Even if you're below that, it's still probably not enough. But that idea, if they're just babysitting the money and just saying, look at Gru, man, they should be talking about taxes. They should be talking about all the different opportunities. As you said, Laura, helping you avoid some bad decisions. We've had a number of clients who come in and as we're getting to know them, they say, oh, I'm a little tight on cash flow. I think I'm going to take all the money out of my 401k and use it for this. Sure, that could be a good choice, but here's what that means long-term. Here's what your taxes are going to be. And as we walk through that with a client, almost always they say, oh, never mind, I want to do that. Similar,
it goes back to Roth conversions. Roth conversions have had a lot of hype, a lot of articles on it. But what we do, our software allows us to understand how much of an IRA conversion to get just before you go into that next tax bracket. So the Roth conversion, when they were first announced, I sat down with clients and said, well, are you willing to pay the income tax on the conversion? They looked at me like, what do you mean? I said, well, you're obligated for the taxes when that money comes out and goes into the Roth. And they just paused because they read the article and said, this is good for you. You can take something that's a good tool and use it as a weapon, and it just becomes counterproductive to what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Right. And having that visibility. And for us, a lot of that comes back from the vision, understanding what that family is about, understanding where they're headed, and then being able to advise them on all these different aspects. So I think the idea of a fiduciary is so important. But as we're talking here, it kind of becomes the first part of the job. It's not the ending. Oh, I found a fiduciary, the job I'm done, I should work with them. It's first, are they fiduciary? That's the first gate. Second, do they have the skill sets that I'm going to need? And then third, to your comment, Laura, do I trust them enough that they can give me hard advice and I believe that they're looking out for my best interest?
And I think, a great illustration here is the medical industry. It's great to see MD after their name, but all of a sudden when you're talking about your care or your child's care or your parents' care, then your next question is, who's the best, right? I want an expert in this specific field. I just don't want a generic doctor. Our 11-year-old recently broke her arm for the second time. So it makes me think about the orthopedic team that she met with first. Were they the best? Should we go back or do we need somebody else? She's 11 years old. The impact of fixing this bone could have a tremendous impact on her whole life. And that's exactly the case scenario when you're talking about somebody who's really at the reins of building out your financial portfolio. A decision made early on could have a huge impact on the rest of your life. Who's
Yeah, I mean,
the best?
I don't think we can emphasize experience enough. I mean, our firm, we've been in the same location now for almost 50 years. And because of my age, I've ran across a lot of situations, and you learn from that, the knowledge you get from listening to people, and you see the outcome. And I think that having somebody on your team that's older, having gray hair or no hair, right? I mean, you got an age issue that you're trying to figure out. And what's their sustainability? How long have they been in business? And I'm not saying that every new kid on the block is necessarily, giving bad advice, but I'm just saying that experience accounts for something.
Right.
And when you're looking at stuff, you can say, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And again, I don't make the comment that I grabbed every opportunity and made the best use of it. But at the same point in time, I've seen a lot. And as I stay engaged in this business, there is some things that I would prefer not to have a client get involved with. And it's just a matter of my experience, right?
Yeah. And I think that's why we make such a great team, frankly, because there's a lot of different experience here and background. And I think just your tenure, Dad, in the industry. And we can read about economic cycles. We can read about black swan events that have impacted the market. We can read about all different types of situations, but having experienced it and lived through it and discussed it with clients, and that is a different level of exposure to that. And as you identify what your needs are in your financial portfolio, what are your key questions? Another thing that Jeremiah really brings to the toolbox here is that legal advice. So when we're talking about building out various entities, we're talking about tax liabilities across the various entities, how those flow in and impact your personal tax liability over time. There are some proactive strategic approaches that could literally save you hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yep.
If not more. And that's something that you don't want to leave on the table because you're dealing with kind of a novice financial advisor who, sure, holds that fiduciary standard, but they're not quite at that level where they can bring you that proactive advice.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Recently we have a number of business owners who they go through, they're entrepreneurs, they own a business, they're going through a sale transaction. And often there's some sort of a group that's offering to roll over equity for tax savings. And my background, I used to do that all the time. And so it's been nice sitting down with these clients, as they're starting to go through this sales process, and they have, teams and accountants and investment bankers all, around them, but to sit with them in the financial role and say, hey, this is what you're going to expect. This is what's ahead of you. This is what's coming up. This is where some of the pitfalls are. And then embedding with their team to help get them through this has been, I think, so valuable. It's not an advisor just sitting on the sidelines and saying, hey, I hope this deal goes well. When it's done, give me the money. I'll help you manage it. Right. But to really embed, to say, okay, what's the tax structure going to be? How do we best tie that in? I guess a very specific example, we had a client who sold his business this year. And in doing that, we set up a donor advised fund to say, how much do you want to give, not just this year, but over the next 10 years? Let's bring all that money to today, get it into this tax year. So really bring down your tax bill and set you up for the future. If they weren't charitably minded, that would not have been something we would have structured for them. But because we understand as a business owner that they're going to have high income and low income years, we want to make sure that everything we're putting in place for their long term pairs really nicely with what's happening this year. So it was a great moment to have our team, kind of pivot and structure around them to do their whole, decades worth of planning, but start taking some real actions in 2025 because their business had a business event in 2025.
Yep. And because of our maturity, we can draw on advice from outside of our realm. So we can talk to tax people and other experts that will allow us to give the best advice to the client.
Yep. Both from, an investment perspective, tax perspective, insurance perspective, and protection, right, et cetera, et cetera. So let your financial advisor kind of quarterback those resources for you and bring the best recommendations. But also you want an advisor that's going to take time to explain these things to you so that you understand them, so that your decision, you're still in control. This is your financial life, right? You want to have exposure, disclosure, like I love that word that you talked about earlier, Dad, what you're paying this team, to manage your financial portfolio. You're knowing why you're investing in this particular life insurance product, et cetera, how your funds are being invested. Even if you don't have an interest there, you need to have a level of knowledge so that you have confidence in the relationship that you hold.
What are the questions to ask? And if you don't even know the questions, that shows your maturity level in the business and also your education level.
Yeah.
And so, yep.
No, I love that when you teed that up. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But we had a couple of questions that we kind of spelled out before this, just as examples. If you're interviewing a financial advisor, you're saying, does my current advisor really serve me in the way that I'd like? Some of the things are, how do they coordinate with your CPA before the end of the year so that you're taking advantage of any tax strategies? Are there any decisions that they would recommend, or have they ever recommended a decision to their client that actually reduces their fee? Right? Have them give you an example. How would they assist you as the client in saying no to a decision? Right? Like, how would that work? What does that look like? Have they ever done that? Have them tell you a story and an example where they've had to deliver some hard advice. So some questions to equip you, and feel free to prompt them, because you want to get to a level of conversation that is authentic and genuine, and ultimately where you feel like, this is the expert, this is my team, this is who I want to work with.
We see a lot of people, especially business owners and high earning professionals, they kind of grow out of their teams. It's not uncommon to say this person helped initially, but now all they're doing is these couple things. I just need more. And if your advisor is not up to the current task of what you need now, it's time to start looking. It's time to look for an advisor that isn't just good for now, but it's going to help take you into the next season of your finances.
Yep. So as we wrap up our time, I know I did a lot of talking today, so thank you, gentlemen, for listening. But I love this conversation of how do we move just beyond that fiduciary role. So as you think about this advisory relationship, when you go beyond that level of fiduciary, that's level one, then you want to consider who's going to be the long-term steward of your financial life. And so for all of our listeners, if you're interested in having that conversation, we'd love to meet with you here at Tricord Advisors. We love the work that we get to do. Thanks for listening.
Until next week, folks. May you grow in wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for listening.
We have a few more things to let you know about before we go. Podcast reviews really help us to serve more people and get this information into the hands of the people who need it. Please leave us a review. Even if it's not 5 stars, we welcome the feedback.
And we invite you to let us know what topics you would like to hear more about, or what would benefit the people in your life who you're closest to. We have more resources online. Those resources are designed to help you share this great information easily with people in your life. To access those resources, please visit tricordadvisors.com.
Often we hear from clients that they wish they had talked to us sooner. If that's you, we'd be thrilled to see how financial planning can benefit your life. Email us at contact@tricordadvisors.com or simply click on the link in the show notes.
This show was produced by Graham Gardner at Model FA. Find out more about how to create a podcast for your financial planning business by visiting modelfa.com. We love creating content that's useful, resourceful, and maybe even a little entertaining. We want to make this mega universe of financial topics and advice applicable and helpful to your life.
Remember, at Tricord Advisors, we are your future's best ally.